So if I'm a brand, right, and maybe I'm not doing that 50 to 100 shipments a month that we talked about to really have some leverage for negotiating, what are some innovative ways or ideas that you guys have seen that help take cost out for both carriers and for the brands?
Yeah, so for me, it's utilizing different modes of transportation and also having multiple brokers as well. So, what I recommend is having a big time broker, have one of the brokers that everyone knows around the industry, and then also have a smaller based broker if you're a smaller brand, a broker that's scrappy, that's willing to compete against that other broker just to win that business, the one that's going to communicate with you every single day. Hey, how you doing? That knows you by name, knows your family members or something like that, that you're not just a number, but also utilize the bigger broker for their capabilities, intermodal capabilities, transloading capabilities, warehousing capabilities. So it's understanding a mix of both and having a diverse network and relationships across the board.
Yeah, for the international side, for brands to be better in cost savings here, it's again having multiple options on the table when it comes down to freight forwarders. Obviously, having a good standing relationship with one is massive, but at least always having someone to just piggyback off of to check if we're in the same market of rates. If you're able to get those two quotes and have a better understanding of what's going on, obviously you can negotiate back and forth to use that in your advantage.
Yeah, some of the stuff I've seen too with startups in particular is just planning out your loads together. And if I have something that's going from Chicago to New York and you have something going from New York to Chicago, being able to band together and almost buy to some extent. I'm not necessarily saying, hey, I'm going to order this truck, but being able to let the broker know that, hey, we're going to both come to you and try to sort that out is an interesting angle. If you've got a little bit more flexibility, milk runs, this idea that rather than going from point A to point B, you're going to go to point A, A1, A2, A3, A4 on the way to point B is also an interesting one. So I think at the end of the day, the brokers or the truck drivers need to keep their trucks full and moving. And anything you can do to help them do that is what's going to ultimately take cost out. A lot of times, like I'll find people who pick warehouses or factories that are in the middle of nowhere, and maybe they had a cheaper price because labor's cheaper or the infrastructure is cheaper, but you're going to give it back in the freight rates because there's brokers that don't want to drive 90 minutes out into the boonies to pick up a single load and then come back. So some of the stuff we were talking about earlier. So thinking about where you are with those transit lanes when you're designing your supply chain is a big impact that can influence the cost that you pay.
I also want to add in there, it's not also where, but when are you moving your cargo? Yeah. So there are some periods where when I was a freight broker, we had a good lane going from Pittsburgh to Chicago. And I know for a fact that now having a lane that would deliver to Chicago on a Monday, you have all the drivers based in Chicago calling you saying, hey, I'll take this load for next to nothing because I want to get home for the weekend. So it's where your freight is, but also when. When it's picking up, the day of the week, the day of the month type of thing to also consider.
Yeah, that reminds me, when I was at Unilever managing freight, we always knew when vegetable season was, because that seemed to wipe out all the capacity in certain parts of the country as they're getting produce out.
Yeah, absolutely. Southeast during the springtime is definitely a no-go when you're coming out of there.
For sure. Nick, you touched on this a little bit earlier when it came to intermodal and just mixing things up. What would you tell a brand who's trying to think about, should I send this via parcel, LTL, FTL, intermodal, etc.?
Yeah, so first thing you need to consider is looking at your brand and saying, okay, what is important to me? Is it cost, time, reliance, and identifying cost is an issue and I want things moved at a cheap cost, move it via LTL. If you have more than 8-ish pallets, move it via intermodal because it's really going to take more time, but it's really going to decrease the cost. If you have anything under a pallet, send it via parcel. But if you want to move things quick, even if you have under 8 pallets, but you need to get there tomorrow, move it via full truckload. So the difference in pricing is that for parcel, you're paying for that individual box, the weights, the dims, and it's similar to the LTL model where you're just paying for your space in that truck. So if you just have 3 pallets, they're going to load that truck up with other shippers to fill that truck, and you're just paying for your spot. And then for full truckload, you're paying for the whole truck. It doesn't matter if you put one single carton or 1 in 40 stacked pallets. It doesn't matter. It's just at the end of the day, you're paying for the whole truck and you're moving it. And then for intermodal, it's similar to the full truckload model, but you're really saving a lot of money. So for example, going from East Coast to West Coast, clearly a lot of containers need to be moved to the West Coast for cargo ships and transloading onto cargo ships. A good amount of containers are moving to the West Coast very cheap and almost empty. So if you can find a lane that you have going from, let's just say, the Northeast down to the West Coast, you can get it for half the cost, but it's just going to add 10 to 15 days in transit.